It's great speaking with you today, Martin. And this is going to be a great call on the importance of dynamic performance appraisal. Can you first provide a brief background of yourself?
One time spent 30 years in procurement supply chain. Oh. And I've worked in primarily electronics and engineering with design companies and manufacturing companies. What I've noticed over that period is that design and manufacture sales are no longer joined together. They're often separate companies, separate operations. And whilst it might seem economically and useful to have them as separate, by losing the joined up line between them, you end up with a disconnected process, and you lose touch with what you're actually trying to do. You'll notice over the years we've had problems with companies using slave labour and child labour, with poisonous chemicals being used in their finished products. And it comes back to not actually having a joined up supply chain, from the concept, the idea that we want to manufacture a product, through to actually supplying that to a customer, whether it's an internal customer or a civilian everyday user in the home. Can you still hear me?
Oh, okay, I can hear you.
Sorry, I've just got the nasty whistle on the line then. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So yeah, that's the. I see that as a significant problem that we have at the moment. That companies are saying we have complex supply chains, when in fact they've actually built in that complexity. And I don't know if you've heard of some of the, for example, the food scares that we've had over the past few years, where you have an animal being bred for slaughter for meat, that then goes through half a dozen different companies, literally half a dozen different companies for feeding, slaughtering, meat stripping off, packing into different types of food stuff, making into different shapes, putting into different label, packaging, etc. And that all could be done fairly centrally, and it's a decision by the end supplier to the customer that they want to break their supply chain up that much. I see that as a significant problem that we do need to overcome and revisit as we start to look at our supply chains again over the next few years.
Well, what would be the cause of this? Any core root causes of this problem?
A lot of it, as I said, has been a financial concern, where somebody has looked at the cost of doing some work and said it's too expensive to do in-house. We can get this other company overseas to do it more cheaply. But they forget that when they do that, they lose the technical expertise to carry out the job that's core to their industry. And if I design and manufacture a product, for example, I can't at some stage say, well, that part of the design is too expensive, it's too complicated, I'll give it to somebody else, because that was actually a core part of my business. The fact it's expensive is unfortunate, but if I lose the skills on how to design it and how to assemble it and manufacture it, then what am I actually doing? I end up just badging something. So it's looking at things in the whole rather than saying that particular process is expensive. We have to understand how it fits into the final product that we're manufacturing. And it is a problem having a deregulated global market. You end up having to chase the lowest price, even though you know it's not necessarily going to be good for you sometimes, I think.
Do you have any specific recommendations for how to create this holistic way of seeing the supply chain?
because of the massive deregulation that we've seen since the 70s. And that includes things like exporting pollution to China, because we're not allowed to use chemicals over here, but we find we can in China and India and Africa, parts of Africa. So we export the industry. We don't actually have the Clean Power Act. So internationally, we need governments to cooperate to stop that sort of offshoring of work simply because there's a financial saving. We need to look at it as a whole. But within industry, they need to be very careful about just letting an accountant decide on something that's going to happen. Financial control is obviously vital for companies, but they do need to look at the quality and the technical expertise that they require to do that job. And if they've got part of their company that is saying the supply chain or something else is getting very complicated, then they need to have particular senior management staff that are responsible for making sure that the processes, all the processes, internal and external, that the company are involved in, that those processes don't become too complicated. And it's an internal driver that makes it complicated, you see. It's not somebody else outside the company that says, I'm going to make it complicated. And if you look at something like, for example, the airbag problem that keeps recurring, that comes down to a number of suppliers not knowing who the end customer is and what's required of them. Now, because of the quality requirements of the auto industry, that shouldn't happen. Because if me as an automaker would have authorised particular suppliers to do things, so if somebody down the line doesn't know they're dealing, that's my fault. I should have had a supply chain manager, a director, went through the supply chain, authorised all the suppliers within my supply chain, right down to the components, the nuts and bolts and electronic components. I should have those designed in and authorised by me. They shouldn't be done by some third party, because it's got my name on it.
And
Toyota had a huge problem with their airbags, and their car sales fell because of it. So you can't turn around and say that it was your supplier that did it wrong because it's got my name on it. That's my argument, and I think that's the way companies need to focus in the future.
Have you seen any examples of making progress on dealing with some of the problem?
Unfortunately not. I mean, you've got companies like Apple where they have that sort of micro-control because they dominate the marketplace. But I find a lot of companies are still interested in passing the buck, as it were, saying that it wasn't an internal problem, it was somebody outside. And even where they've had serious problems, such as the problems in Bangladesh with factories collapsing, there hasn't been a drive to actually sort that out. There have been people put in place that are supposed to sort it out, but if you look behind that and look at the work that they've carried out to improve conditions, there's very little work actually being done. And it is disappointing that they're not really taking ownership of their work properly.
Thanks, Martin, for sharing today. Do you have any final recommendations?
I think companies do need to look seriously at their supply chains, at how they're managed. There are changes that will take place. There are environmental problems that we face that will see changes in the supply chain. There are consumer changes in the way that we look at the products we're buying, both mechanical, electronic stuff as well as foodstuffs. People are starting to question what's happening there, and the companies that are responsible for those supply chains do need to start to look at what they're doing and be much more proactive, I think.
And thanks again, and I look forward to staying in touch if you have additional updates on this topic or further topics.
Yeah, sure, and if you get any feedback on that, certainly give me a shout. And if you have a look at my profile, you'll see I've got experience in other areas. If there's anything that you'd like me to do any research on or discuss with you, certainly give me a shout. And